Hi, welcome back to Design for Equitable Systems. And today we're going to talk about partnerships and coalition building. This is part of the problem definition stage because we'll be realizing now that to really address these problems, you need a deep understanding of who is there and who can you work with to advance the change that you want. So I hope today will be really useful in developing out those tactics so you can be the best designer for systems change that you want to be. So your readings are all not from design spaces because really design doesn't talk as much about the partnerships, the coalition building beyond just, a single partner. So hopefully this stuff will get you to expand your view of the world outside of, the design world, if that's your space, and get to think about some learnings from community organizing that I think are really powerful in systems work. So enjoy. And remember last time we talked about problem spaces and understanding the problem so that you can do the best work possible for that community. And this is, again, really diving into the ethics of research. And as we know, the world is based really heavily in evidence. We must care how it gets made. We must care about who is in the room, who's making the decisions, and who is gaining and benefiting from research. Diverse voices are needed in rooms to inclusively assess inequities. Those that don't have this lived experience interpreting needs will likely miss things because they're interpreting from a lens of bias. And we saw this play out from the Chicago Beyond reading in terms of all the inequities of the research world, which design is based heavily in human-centered research, and realizing that all of these inequities can be addressed, but they take intentional effort to give power back to communities versus giving powers to the researchers, the designers who are extracting information. And remember that in defining problems, communities are a critical part, and this technique from the Creative Reaction Lab really helps you just to simply collect pledges from members of the community, or just even from online reading synthesis of, what do people really want to do? What are the things that they're challenging others to take on to do systemic work? And realizing that when you synthesize these and you look across these commitments, you can see the ways that people are already addressing the problems, and you're tapping into those assets of the community versus thinking of what's the problem, the deficit that this community has. So that brings us to partners and coalitions. Once you are starting to get a feel for your problem space, you're going to want to know who is there and who could actually leverage your work and make it more powerful. So coalitions. I think coalitions, I want to say, are going beyond partnerships because they're not just a transactional relationship. They're a collective joint intelligence, which is a really cool way of thinking about it. A brain trust of people that have similar purposes and objectives for social change. And they're all combining together to make powerful spaces for changing communities. There's a strength in numbers. And I think that's something that we think, ourselves alone, we always tell the activists that changes the world. But without their partners, without a strong coalition of networks across the country, people can't change complex systems. There's many players, as we've learned, in the birdcage. And so you need to really collaborate across spaces in order to make that change. And you really need these diverse partners in order to do really cool experimentation work, because you need all these different players who have different parts of the social impact process. And often, in order to gain a movement to have legitimacy, it needs a broad pace of participation. You need a lot of people in the room who agree with the methods and agree with the techniques to really work on systems level change. So how to form your coalition? We're all maybe young and we're wondering, how can I get a group behind me? I think one of the first techniques to really think about forming some coalitions around you is to start getting people that believe the collective is greater than the individual. And this is hard in a country that's as individualistic as the United States, where we're all kind of in our own silos and our own boxes. But if you can find those special partners that are like, I don't care if we as an organization succeed as long as we're addressing the problem space. And you get those people that really value the community and really value addressing problem spaces and bring them in the room to do effective work. You can also rally around a solidified theory of change, as we talked about previously. Part of that coalition is all agree that there's a way to change the world, and we're all going to play our part in doing that effort. Make sure that you're nominating and building out leadership for the work and having strategic coordinators that really can see the map of the work and navigate among all the different players to ensure that you're working and moving forward in a systemic way, as I would like to say. Make sure that you're agreeing upon leadership models, maybe having a few tapped core leadership that are able to synthesize information, ensure partners are taken care of. This is a very powerful work around and youth organizing that I think could be more heavily tapped into. Make sure that you're using, again, this is a brain trust. You're collecting partners that can all share information with one another, and you can play to their strengths. You can realize that some partners have deep expertise in a specific community, and you can learn from those members and gain that knowledge. And make sure that, again, you're valuing the time of your partners, especially for community organizations. They are very busy doing their work. And often a partnership or a coalition can sometimes be extractive and be a lot of work. So the more you can ease that burden and give simple tasks or have a really nice meeting agenda or a really quick talk, you can really value their time and effort. And finally, work to sustain morale. As we have learned, this work is not easy, but if you can value that collective win, those like big things that you can accomplish can really keep a coalition going and show the value in working with each other and pooling resources and knowledge together so that you're actually collaborating rather than just disjointedly addressing those little rungs of the birdcage. And once you are, doing any of this partnership work, you're likely to want to map out the power and map out who can you influence in order to make the change that you want, which is critical in any design work, any organizing work that looks at these deeply ingrained systemic challenges that have been perpetuated by those that hold the highest echelons of our society. And I really love this quote by Alice Walker that was featured in the power mapping article, is that the most common way that people give up power is by thinking they don't have any. And this is this is what we've done to marginalize and underinvest communities. We've told them that this is just the way things are. This is just your place in the world. There's no way that you're going to be able to get beyond this. And so people become disenfranchised because they don't believe that there's a way to change things. They don't believe there's a way to influence those up top. And so they don't engage in any efforts. But we need to realize that many of us working together are more powerful than, these few upper echelon individuals, as they are often reporting to the needs of the people. So why Power Map? It is a really powerful tool for doing systemic change because you are not only realizing who holds power, but you're also seeing the ways in which relationships exist that can influence your targets or the change that you want to see, if it's a political change or you want an organization to shift their work. You're realizing that relationships have deep connections and can often influence the change you want to see. And you should do this power map before you go deep into your design work, because the power map should influence the way that you engage in your systemic engagement work. Because you can go after the wrong targets and you can go after the wrong problems, and you'll find that you'll waste a ton of resources by doing that. And ensure always that your understanding of the issue is comprehensive. When you're battling up against people that do not believe in you and hold more power than you, often you are trying to gain legitimacy in their eyes to get them to see that this change needs to happen. There's something there that people are calling for. So that means you need to know the issues deeply. You need to know the people in the space and know how they all connect with one another. So here's a very simple power map. There are several ways to do these, but I like this one just because it's a 2x2. So it's very easy to use and map and start to see relationships of power. And so you're going to have two axes. One is a degree of the power, and one is a degree of those that agree with you and disagree with you. So your steps to starting to build your power map are going to work to identify all of your stakeholders in a space. So if you're working in the challenge of education, decolonizing education, for example, you're going to want to have teachers. You're going to want to have students. You're going to want to have parents. You're going to want to have, community organizations that work in the schools, the school board, principals. All of these people are going to be people that you're going to identify that have any stake in the problem at hand. And then you're going to want to have to understand their power. So students, more likely than not, will believe themselves to be less powerful, at least in terms of where they are in the decision-making tree. And they might agree with you, especially right now with how messed up education is. So you're going to have them in that maybe agree, less powerful quadrant. And then you might have a school board member who maybe you'll have one that agrees with you and can be your strongest ally. So they can be powerful and they agree with you. It could be a stakeholder in your process. And you could also have a school board member that completely disagrees with you and also is in a high position of power. And so then you can get an understanding of where everyone's at and start to see, who are the stakeholders and the players. So it might look a little bit something like this. You'll have you kind of over there. It's okay. Your little green dot. You'll have your community, which values you and agrees with you, and your champions within that community that are maybe community organizations, local activists, etc. And then you'll have your dissenters. They might hate you, but they might not be powerful. They can be powerful, but often they're just that noise that doesn't agree and is also trying to influence the decision makers against the change that you want. And then you have the decision makers, and they might range. They might be people that are starting to agree with you, but are sort of on the fence, all the way to people that completely disagree with you. And as you can see, we're mapped them out here, but I also drew a little bit some of these arrows. Some of these arrows can start to help you see the relationships between all these powerful individuals. So you might not be able to directly influence the decision maker, but you can go through dissenters and try to change their minds to influence decision makers. Or you can try to influence some of your community members that have stakes with decision makers to start to see them influence each other and start to see the change that you want. And here's just a little summary just to kind of show the different types of people that you might have when you identify and map out power. You might have your champions. So these might be people that might not be super powerful in decision-making roles, but they have those connections, that data and the lived experience to be able to say, hey, I know how we can make this happen. I know how we can get you on the path of change. And they'll be part of the partnerships and coalition that we talked about at the beginning of this lecture. And your champions are who can help you find those key supporters that are going to believe in you. And once you have influenced them, start to make the changes that you want, as well as deal with your opponents, who you might be able to change, but might often just be dissonant voices, as well as the fence sitters that are maybe decision makers who don't have much of an idea of this challenge that you might need to work to educate in order to bring them to your side. So this is just an easy way, another activity. So once you even mapped out the power, you can start to map out these kind of different stakeholders of people who might have an influence in your problem space and where they might be in terms of their understanding of the challenge and agreement with the challenge. And as you start to draw these arrows and map out these relationships, you can start to see the influence and power. So you might have one-way directional influence. So one person really isn't influenced by the other, but there's one person that can really push a lot of information upwards. You can also have stakeholders that are mutually influenced, and they can be discussing between each other these issues and help to sway in different ways. And then finally, you can have people that have power. One person, maybe the more powerful one, has power over the other, as an employee or anything like that, but that person can still influence. So even if it's still kind of an imbalanced relationship, there's still some ways that influence can go upwards to that final decision maker you're trying to change their minds about the topic. So Hope that was a good intro. It's very rough intro to power mapping. There's many more articles out there, but I'll provide a few activities that you can do to start to think about your space and start to map out the power inherent in these challenges. So to wrap up today, your most valuable skill is to listen. We are very, as activists and people passionate about issues, we often want to speak far more than we want to listen to others, especially if we disagree with them. But it's sometimes powerful to show that you're willing to step up and you're willing to put, yourself aside for a second in order to hear someone out. And while you might not agree with what they're saying, at least in listening, you can start to realize how you might be able to influence them and bring them over to your side. It's 30% listening, 70%, 70% listening, 30% speaking, which the Indivisible article talked about. Knowing that there's no secret way to persuade people. People like to say that there's a secret sauce to influence, but it depends on each person because everyone is unique. We all have biases, lived experiences, beliefs, and they will all influence the way that we see the world. And so you can never, ever go into a conversation assuming that you know what the other person thinks without talking to them and asking them first. And at the end of the day, because it's about listening, you are not trying to win a debate. You are trying to get someone who might have disparate views from you to commit to some kind of meaningful action that supports the justice work that you care about. So your commitment at the end of the day in listening and organizing people is to get the story. What does the person you're talking to believe and why? What are those deep-seated values that influence the way that they see the world? Are they based in justice? Do they believe in truth and data? Do they believe in fairness? Do they believe in pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, even if that is kind of a fake lie, but it's something that people might believe. And you need to know that so that you can understand and connect to those values. You need to start to get them to imagine what's possible. Try to get them outside of their heads in terms of the way they see the world and say, if you think about this, think about, you care about people living up to their potential. How can we design better systems so that people don't get sidetracked by poverty and marginalization and underinvestment and are able to live up to their full potential? And you can start to see the ways that you can influence them, even if they completely disagree with your original point of view. And finally, you're working towards an ownership of action. Just having a conversation is great, but without follow-up steps, you're never going to move them forward into the work that you want and influencing them to commit to some kind of additional justice work. And sometimes we have to work with people that we 100%, I'm going to put my video off so you can see this whole screen, we 100% disagree with. We 100% do not want to listen to. They make us angry. And we realize that we have to really calmly go into that conversation because it's one that we maybe don't want to have. And so in doing this, it's a really nice 4-step process that you can practice to be able to best influence those that might completely, sideline your views. First, seek to understand. You are trying to give them the space to speak without interruption so that you can understand the origins of where this bias is coming from and where the statement that they said or maybe problematic beliefs they have are coming from. Once you've done that, you can then affirm what you've heard. Affirming does not mean agreement with what you've heard. It is rather saying, hey, I've listened to you. I see where this point is coming from, given your background, but knowing that this is not affirming bigotry or compromising your values, or rather noting that you've heard what they've said and you understand what they've said, rather than swiping over that to think of a witty comeback. Now that you've let them speak, you can answer. You can clarify your position without minimizing theirs and making sure that you're adding to their perspective and tapping into the values that they've said they care about. And finally, once you've done that, you can redirect, which is a work towards a resolution that brings you closer to your own goals and does not compromise on your values. Know that you might not be able to change their mind, you're not be able to bring them entirely over to your side, but you're doing those nudges that start to bring them to a point where they can see who you are, why you care about this, and how it can even align with their values, and start to bring them to justice work. Now, this process might be one that you repeat with someone over and over again, but it's one where you can break down some of those really high-powered decision makers and bring them over to your side for justice. And some ways to even start these conversations. I won't go fully through these, but just look at them when you have the time. But it's just trying to get, again, you're starting with listening, you're starting with trying to understand, rather than starting with, winning the debate, which I think we're always finding ourselves conflicting with. Okay, and final slide on this section. For a comprehensive guide to combating bigotry, because you might confront this, you might be working with someone and they say something incredibly racist and don't understand the problematic views that they're espousing. Check out this guide, which will be linked in this deck from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which helps you to look at bias and bigotry in many different lenses and is super useful for doing this organizing work. So, some closing thoughts. I realized I didn't do my closing thoughts today. So instead, I will say, my closing thoughts are your partnerships are essential to this work. Without stakeholders, you are maybe one person, but with those coalitions, you are a powerful, organized group of people that's ready to make the systemic change that you want. So now I can say the next readings. So next readings are going to be about transforming your problems into opportunities for justice work. And so this work will start to get you to challenge your judgment, think about critically about stuff that you're hearing, as well as get to see, different ways in which designers can transform problems into design and ways that we can do it in an equitable way. As always, email me if you need any help with this readings. And I'm just thankful as always for you to be here and wish you the best week. And I'll see you on Friday.